China, the foreign ministers met at the SEO Summit in Kazakhstan. We look at how India may be changing its approach towards Beijing. Also, how Putin and Xi may appear like allies, but at this summit, they're also frenemies, vying for influence in Central Asia. Russia is among the most sanctioned countries in the world, but it's back to the category of a high-income economy and growing faster than the Western countries that have imposed sanctions. We'll tell you how. In the US, Joe Biden's election campaign is in disarray as investors are worried. In the UK, it's election day. We look at what's going on there. In India, celebrating our World Cup heroes, the team returned home today. A new investigation says China has multiple spy bases in Cuba. Floods in Assam wreak havoc. Luxury bags are in the news after a probe finds that a Dior bag that sells for $2,800 takes just $57 to make. And 100 years of the Caesar salad, how did it survive and go global, and how not all salads are healthy? Lots to unpack. The headlines first. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi will visit Russia next week. This will be Prime Minister Modi's first trip to Moscow since Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022. Isolated by the West, Russia sees India as a key diplomatic and economic ally. Prime Minister Modi last visited Russia in September 2019. Vladimir Putin says he takes Donald Trump's comments on ending the Ukraine conflict seriously, but the Russian president admits he is not aware of Trump's specific proposals. Trump has claimed that he can end the Russia-Ukraine war within days if he is elected the US president again. The European Union slaps Chinese electric vehicles with tariffs of up to 38%. Last year, the EU had launched an investigation. It was over claims of unfair state subsidies by China, which undercut European automakers. The move comes despite Beijing's warning that it would unleash a trade war. The Democratic Republic of Congo sentences 25 soldiers to death. They were accused of fleeing the fighting against the M23 rebels. In May, 8 Congolese soldiers were sentenced to death for cowardice. Kinshasa has also accused Rwanda of backing the M23 rebels. Iran's 2 remaining presidential candidates hold final rallies before Friday's runoff. Iran has 61 million eligible voters, but only 40% turned up at the polls last week. It was the lowest turnout in any presidential election since the 1979 Islamic Revolution. And a diplomatic row erupts between Germany and Turkey. It is over a Turkish footballer's alleged ultra-nationalist hand gesture. This incident took place during Turkey's win over Austria in the Euros. Germany summons the Turkish ambassador. Ankara calls Berlin xenophobic. Tonight we'll talk about India's biggest security challenge, China. The border situation has been festering. Will Prime Minister Modi's third term see a new approach towards China? Is New Delhi adopting a tougher line? And why do we want to discuss this tonight? Because of a meeting that was held earlier today in Astana. It's the capital of Kazakhstan. They're hosting the SEO Summit. That's the Shanghai Cooperation Organisation. India and China are members. Their foreign ministers met today. That's S. Jaishankar and Wang Yi. They discussed the border standoff and agreed to, quote-unquote, redouble efforts to resolve the crisis. Jaishankar spoke about this last month as well. He said it's a priority for India.
चीन के बारे में हम तो हमारी फोकस तो होगी कि सीमा में जो स्थिति जो है उसमें अभी भी कुछ इश्यूज बाकी बचे हुए हैं तो उसको कैसे निपटाया जाए.
The question is, how will India solve them, these border issues? In today's meeting, Jaishankar adopted a slightly different approach. He calls it the 3 mutuals: mutual respect, mutual sensitivity, and mutual interest. The minister said that these 3 points will guide India's relationship with China. But what does this mean in practical terms? Has the Modi government firmed up its China strategy in its third term? Let's look at some recent events and try to join the dots. First of all, Prime Minister Modi is not attending the SEO Summit himself. Chinese President Xi Jinping is there, so is Russian President Vladimir Putin, but the Indian Prime Minister has chosen to skip it and he sent his foreign minister instead. Beijing sees this as a sign. Chinese observers believe that New Delhi has frozen contact at the highest levels because of the border standoff. The negotiations remain stalled. In the last 4 years, the two sides, India and China, have met some 21 times. India has pushed for a complete disengagement of Chinese troops. On 2 separate occasions, Prime Minister Modi has personally conveyed this to Xi Jinping. Last year in Johannesburg, Modi spoke to Xi at the BRICS summit. Reports say they did discuss the border and they agreed to a speedy disengagement. But Beijing did not walk the talk. A similar exchange happened in 2022 as well. At the G20 summit in Bali, Modi and Xi were seen together at the leaders' dinner. Later, India and China confirmed that they talked about the border and agreed to stabilize the line of actual control, LAC, the de facto India-China border. They agreed to stabilize it. So in every meeting, the Chinese leader agrees to pull back troops. But his soldiers remain where they are. And this duplicity has upset India. It has little incentive to bother with engagements at the highest levels, especially at forums like the SCO, where China's influence is evident. New Delhi has demonstrated this displeasure in other areas too, like in the economic relationship with China. A few weeks ago, a story emerged. Beijing had reached out to New Delhi. It wanted India to resume direct passenger flights to China. They were stopped during the pandemic. China wants these direct flights to resume. Over the past year, Beijing has repeatedly raised this request with New Delhi. Chinese airlines too have made an effort. They've made appeals to India's civil aviation authorities, but so far New Delhi has refused. No direct flights between India and China. India has also taken a tougher position on issues that China is sensitive about, like Tibet and Taiwan. Last month, Taiwan's President Lai Ching-te congratulated Prime Minister Modi after the election results. And the Prime Minister responded, saying that he looked forward to developing closer ties with Taipei. A few weeks later, India hosted a delegation of American lawmakers. They met the Dalai Lama in Dharamshala. The visit was planned after the US Congress passed the Reform Tibet Act, an act that calls on Beijing to talk to the Tibetans. Prime Minister Modi then hosted this American delegation at his residence as well. Beijing lodged a firm protest against this.
The so-called Tibetan government in exile is an out-and-out separatist and political group. It is an illegal organization that completely violates the constitution and laws of China and is recognized by no country in the world. With regard to the contacts and negotiations between the Chinese government and the 14th Dalai Lama, our policy is consistent and clear. The key is that the 14th Dalai Lama must fundamentally reflect on and thoroughly correct his political views.
China keeps making such statements, but India remains undeterred. Its messaging is quite clear and quite significant. If China ignores India's concerns on the border, India can respond in kind. India can put pressure on China when it comes to Tibet, Taiwan, and the economic relationship. Essentially, here's the takeaway for Beijing. You cannot have a normal relationship with tens of thousands of troops deployed at the border. India's clear weakness here is its trade dependence on China. It cannot be reduced overnight. So the next best option is to stay the course on building pressure, because that's the only language that China understands. So the Indian Prime Minister is a no-show, but other SCO leaders are in Astana. China's President Xi Jinping is in attendance, so is Russian President Vladimir Putin, Pakistan's Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif, and the Central Asian heads of state. 4 of them are members of the SCO: Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, and Uzbekistan. They're all members. Many of their leaders met on the sidelines of the summit, and one of the most talked about meetings was this one, between the leaders of Pakistan and Russia. Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif met President Vladimir Putin. It happened yesterday. They discussed trade and energy cooperation.
From Pakistan.
Supplies of our energy carriers to Pakistan have started, and we are ready to increase them. At your request, Russia tries to make its contribution to ensuring food security in Pakistan. We are increasing the supply of grains to the Pakistani market.
We used to import a lot of machinery and goods from erstwhile Soviet Russia, and we used to export textile, leather goods to your country, and it was under barter. I think today is the time we can overcome financial and other banking issues by renewing our trade and expanding our trade under barter.
Looks like a meeting of old friends, but it wasn't always so rosy between them. Pakistan and Russia were in opposite camps during the Cold War. Islamabad was aligned with America, Russia was closer to India. But a lot has changed since then. Global power equations and alliances have changed, and Russia and Pakistan have warmed up to each other. Last year, Islamabad struck a deal with Moscow to buy discounted Russian crude oil. This year, Moscow will ramp up its supplies to Pakistan, so Pakistan will get more cheap oil. Russia will be able to bypass sanctions and sell more of its oil. It's a win-win for both. But the meeting was not all business. There were a few awkward moments too, like this one. That was Shehbaz Sharif ignoring a photo op with President Putin. Instead, he greets Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov first. Talk about priorities. But Putin did not seem to think much of it. Well, we wouldn't know if he did. And Sharif is not new to such gaffes at SEO. Last year, he had a prolonged struggle with the earpiece. So that's one highlight from this summit, the Putin-Sharif meeting. The second one involves a new member. Last year it was Iran. It joined the SEO in 2023, Iran. This year it was Belarus's turn. Until 2022, the SEO had 8 members. Now it has 10. Iran and Belarus have been added in the last 2 years. So the group is expanding. It now accounts for 40% of the global population and 30% of the global GDP. And finally, highlight number 3, the Astana Declaration. All 10 members have signed it. It's basically a joint statement. And what does it say? 3 major things. 1, the SEO mentions, and I'm quoting, tectonic shifts in global politics. It wants the group to play a bigger role. In other words, stand up to the West. Number 2, double standards on tackling terrorism. The SEO says it is unacceptable, which is a bit rich coming from a group where Pakistan is a member, but that's geopolitics for you, lofty statements and shady actions. And point number 3 from the declaration, the SEO will never militarize the outer space. That's their statement. What does one make of it? And of this group, which has a clear clash of priorities. The SEO, or the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, was founded in the year 2001. It's been 23 years, and in all this time, they've struggled with stating their purpose. What do they want to do? There's no consensus. Every member wants a different thing. Beijing wants the SEO to be a Chinese-led club to establish their control over Eurasia, basically like a fast track for Xi Jinping's Belt and Road Initiative. On the other hand, Russia wants status quo. Central Asia is Moscow's backyard, and they don't want to let go of this turf. Russia wants to maintain its traditional sway, which explains the induction of its close ally Belarus this year. So while Putin and Xi may appear like allies, they're also competing with each other, vying for influence in the SEO. It's like a private duel. Although there's one thing that they agree on, and that's hating on the West.
Our cooperation is not aimed against anyone. We do not create any blocks for alliances. We simply act in the interests of our people.
They may be saying that, but do they really believe that? Look at the Astana Declaration. It has criticized a unilateral build-up of missiles. No country was named, but we all know who they're talking about. It's the West. Plus, the declaration does not mention the war in Ukraine. It talks about the Gaza war, though. The SEO has called for a complete ceasefire in Gaza. But beyond this display of unity, the occasional jibes at the West and the lofty statements, is the SEO any good? I guess it depends on how you look at it. Russia and China see it as an anti-West alliance. India is realistic about its limited potential. And for Central Asia, it's all about the investments. But for any regional group to succeed, you need some degree of unity, political unity. And that is the SEO's biggest weakness. Its divisions are holding the group hostage. Until they're resolved, there can be little cooperation in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. And now let's narrow our focus and look at one SEO member in particular, Russia. The Russian economy was just given a stamp of approval by none other than the World Bank. I'm not joking. Russia, the country embroiled in a seemingly endless war, the country languishing under countless sanctions, that very same Russia is beating all economic expectations, so much so that it is now once again a high-income country. This is according to the latest World Bank data. It clearly shows that Russia is on the rise. You know the last time Russia had a high-income economy? It was back in 2014, the year that invaded Ukraine's Crimea. That is the year when the West started putting sanctions on Russia and Moscow felt the brunt. They felt it for a while. But over the last decade, Russia has adapted. It has found ways to bypass the constant sanctions. And now it is back to being among the richest nations in the world. So how exactly did this happen? First, let's look at what the World Bank is saying. Its list of high-income nations depends on one factor, and that is gross national income per capita. Now, gross national income, or GNI, is like the GDP, but there's a key difference between domestic and national, GDP and GNI. GDP measures the economic growth within a country's border. In contrast, GNI also counts the income that is sent from overseas, like remittances or money that a business makes overseas. GNI adds that. That's the simplest way to differentiate between GDP and GNI. So the World Bank says that Russia's GNI has been rising. And in 2023, it entered the high income bracket. It crossed $14,000 per capita. So how did Moscow manage this in the middle of a war? Well, the country has transformed itself. It is now relying on a wartime economy. The demand for weapons and military services is fueling economic growth. Think about Russian soldiers, the ones on the front lines. Many are new recruits, mobilized for the war. They are being paid more than Russia's oil industry workers. So many people from Russia's poorer regions have signed up to fight, which means money has flowed to all corners of the country. Now you may wonder, where is all this money coming from? How is Russia generating the revenue to pay its soldiers? Isn't it supposed to be under crippling sanctions? Well, Russia is under sanctions, thousands of them. But it is far from crippled. The sanctions have hit Russia's trade, its exports, but just to the West. The US, UK and EU are the ones imposing the sanctions, along with their friends like Canada, Australia and Japan. Many of these countries were once export markets for Russia, so Moscow has had to adapt and move away from these Western nations. It has created alternative trade opportunities with old allies like China, North Korea and Iran, and also with neutral countries like India, the Gulf states and African nations. And this rerouting of trade has helped Russia. Last year, the trade rebounded by almost 7%. And that was a major reason for Russia's income rank upgrade. Overall, their GNI per capita grew by more than 11% last year. If we look at the basic GDP, it grew by 3.6% last year. Russia's GDP grew by 3.6%. That's more than all the countries that have imposed sanctions on Moscow. The US, for instance, grew by 2.5%. The UK by a measly 0.1%. Even Australia grew by just 3%, but Russia had 3.6%. So clearly, whatever Moscow is doing has been working. But there's one thing to note here. Every country that sanctioned Russia was already in the high-income group. It was the rich nations trying to keep Russia down. So Putin turned to the rest of the world, to the global south. And this is why Russia is defying all expectations.
Is President Biden considering stepping down?
Absolutely not.
Is there anything, Karine, that would change his mind?
Look, I cannot lay out something that would change the president's mind.
He arrives back in the United States 12 or 13 days before the debate. So his explanation for a poor debate performance is jet lag.
So what I want to say is it's the jet lag and also the cold.
That was Biden's press secretary. If you think your job is tough, spare a thought for her. The president is fumbling left, right and center, and it's her job to defend him. She's been fielding some tough questions from journalists on Joe Biden's health, especially after he tanked at the debate last week. His team has come up with all kinds of excuses in the past few days. First, they said he had a cold. Then they said he'd studied too hard. First Lady Jill Biden has offered her own explanation. She told reporters that Biden, and I'm quoting, did not feel that great during the debate. She didn't say what was it that made the president uncomfortable. Was it the cold or the questions from reporters? Finally, we heard from Joe Biden himself yesterday. He blamed it on a jet lag from a trip that he took nearly 2 weeks ago. And today, Biden spoke again. What was the excuse this time? The president says he had a bad night.
I had a bad night. I screwed up. I made a mistake. And but I learned from my father, when you get knocked down, just get back up.
It appears even his press secretary cannot keep track of all of this. So she said that the president had both a cold and a jet lag. Let's listen to that statement again.
You all heard it in his voice when he did the debate, right? And it is not even something that we shared ahead of time. You heard it in his voice and we confirmed it. And I think that's important to note as well. Like, it is the jet lag and the cold.
Let me remind you, this is not some teenager trying to explain why they did not bring their homework to school. We're talking about the US president here, who is 81 years of age and running for a second term in office. Biden's age and his health have become serious issues for his voters as well as his donors. One of them is Reed Hastings. He's the co-founder of Netflix. Do you know how much money he's donated to the Democrats and Biden? More than $20 million in recent years. Last year, he gave $100,000 for Biden's re-election campaign. In American terms, he's a mega donor, someone who can drum up more support and money for Biden. But Hastings says he's lost faith in him. He wants Joe Biden to step aside. He wants the Democrats to find a replacement. Let me quote from his statement. The president needs to step aside to allow a vigorous Democratic leader to beat Trump and keep us safe and prosperous. He couldn't have been clearer. So this is what Biden is faced with. His party leaders want him to go, his voters want him to go, and now his donors too want him to go. But the president refuses to go. He says he won't drop out of the race.
What I can say is the president is moving forward. He's moving forward as being president. He's moving forward with his campaign, as his campaign has been very, very clear about that.
So Biden won't make way for someone younger. His rival Donald Trump, who is no spring chicken himself, he's 78 years old, and he has a different assessment. He believes that Biden is on the verge of, quote-unquote, quitting the race. That's what Trump has said. And Trump says that Kamala Harris would replace Joe Biden. She's the current vice president. Trump has called her a bad and pathetic candidate. His words, bad and pathetic. As things stand, Donald Trump has every reason to feel confident. The debate has boosted his campaign. He's doing better in opinion polls, and his opponents are considerably weakened. Trump couldn't have asked for a better situation. But investors don't seem to like it. They're feeling anxious over the future of Biden's campaign and the election result. 3 different polls have found that most investors are concerned about the current situation in the US, and it's not surprising. Investors do not like uncertainty, and there's a lot of it in US politics right now. One party is on the verge of asking a sitting president to drop out of the race. The other side is ready to nominate a convicted felon. So from the investors' point of view, there is both short-term and long-term risk here. Biden's withdrawal could shake up the markets. If Trump wins, America could have a president who could potentially end up in prison. It is bad whichever way you look at it. And this is the world's largest economy. The fallout of this election won't just hit Americans, it will be felt across the world. For our next story, let's look at India. Today seems like a public holiday in the country, or at least in its financial capital. Thousands are out on the streets of Mumbai. The Marine Drive is packed with people. And why are they there? To catch a glimpse of their sporting heroes. The Indian cricket team is back. They won the T20 World Cup last Saturday, but their return was delayed by a hurricane in the Caribbean. Now the World Cup winning heroes have finally returned, and they've had a busy day. A breakfast meeting with Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, a victory parade in Mumbai, and so much more. Take a look at how India celebrated the men in blue.
Last Saturday, India erupted in celebrations. People out on the streets, bursting firecrackers, honking their horns, dancing like there's no tomorrow. After all, a decade of heartbreaks had finally come to an end. India had just won the T20 World Cup. For the cricket-obsessed nation, the 13-year-long World Cup trophy drought was finally over. The country was waiting for the team's triumphant return, but the weather played a dampener. There was a hurricane in the Caribbean. The team couldn't fly back, and India waited with bated breath for the World Cup heroes to return. Well, that wait finally ended today as Team India returned home. This morning, the men in blue landed in New Delhi. They were greeted by whistles and cheers. It was a rainy morning in the national capital, but that didn't deter the fans. Hundreds showed up, waiting to catch a glimpse of their heroes.
Sir, मैं 4 बजे से वेट कर रहा हूँ और झांसी से आया हूँ, and I'm waiting for my team India.
Celebrations were all around. Captain Rohit Sharma even broke out in a dance. Delhi boy Virat Kohli got the loudest cheers as he waved to the fans. After that, the team had a packed schedule. First, a meeting with the Indian Prime Minister. PM Modi met the whole team. He sat down for a chat with them, even posed for a photo with the glittering trophy. The Indian Prime Minister even got his own jersey. Next, it was another flight for Team India, this time to Mumbai. India's financial capital was honouring the men in blue with a victory parade. Once the team landed in Mumbai, they were greeted with a water cannon salute. The first to come out of the airport was Vice Captain Hardik Pandya with the hard-fought trophy in hand, and the crowd erupted in joy. The rest of the team followed. The victory parade was supposed to start at Nariman Point, and by the evening, Marine Drive was packed. Thousands were out on the streets waiting for their heroes. The team travelled through Marine Drive and they arrived at Wankhede Stadium, where thousands more were waiting for them. The stands were packed and the cheers deafening. India has long been one of the best cricket teams in the world, but the men in blue have had years of disappointment. Last year, they lost the ODI World Cup at home to Australia. Even this match wasn't an easy win. But India held their nerve to defend 176 while South Africa choked. Anchored by Virat Kohli's match-winning 76, a spell of brilliant bowling by Jasprit Bumrah and Hardik Pandya, and what's being called the greatest catch ever by Surya Kumar Yadav. The men in blue emerged as winners, a redemption for a nation where cricketers are more than mere mortals.
Every time we have come here, the final hurdle, somehow we have not been able to do that. I think it was destiny, perhaps, billion fans, best wishes, because the way Henrik Klaasen was batting, it just looked like match will get over in 18th over. But I think Indian team trusted themselves in their ability, because if you look at Kensington Oval's pitch was always favourable to the fast bowler. Indian fast bowler had bowled exceedingly well throughout the tournament. You look at the stats of Jasprit Bumrah, economy rate of 4.12, it has never ever happened in the history of T20 World Cup. He was the first bowler to win a man of the tournament. Before that, it was either the likes of Virat Kohli, Shane Watson, Shahid Afridi, either prime main batsman or all-rounder. So that speaks volumes about the match winners in the Indian team. We all thought that West Indies was the land of spinners. Spinners will get assist, 4 spinners were there always. But it was the fast bowler who tilted the balance eventually.
Right, Vimal, of course, that is something to actually celebrate about. If you can actually see us, we are also wearing blue because our Men in Blue has come back. We are celebrating their grand victory. But Vimal also talking about how a very heavy weight was sort of lifted off of Hardik Pandya's chest.
Keir Starmer put his personal ambition ahead of our country's national interest.
But for the Labour Party, this is a very difficult bill.
It's election day in the UK and all the major players have cast their ballots. There's Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, leader of the UK Conservative Party, or the Tories as they're called. He was seen out and about early in the day. He voted in his constituency in Northern England. Then there was Sunak's chief rival, the Labour Party leader Keir Starmer. Starmer voted in London, the British capital, the city he hopes to rule from in the coming days. And by the looks of it, Londoners want him too, or at least they want the Conservatives out.
At this point, it doesn't even matter, but I mean, the Labour obviously predicted to win. Personally, I prefer the Greens, but the Conservatives have got to go.
I think a bit more stability, fewer of these, I don't know, dirty politics from the Tories. So hopefully things get cleaned up a little bit, but I think it's time for a change.
The Conservatives or Tories have ruled for 14 years. The UK has seen 5 prime ministers in this time, a botched Brexit and a brutal cost of living crisis. So you can understand why the British people wanted change. This next voter sums it up.
Yeah, I'm voting Labour. It's actually a new constituency, so I think probably it is going to go Labour. I've been a Labour voter basically since I could vote. I'm feeling excited. I feel like it can only get better, right?
That is the sentiment that Rishi Sunak is up against. That is why he is predicted to lose. Opinion polls have been against the Tories for months. Ever since Rishi Sunak became Prime Minister in 2022, he took over after the party had imploded thanks to his predecessors. Sunak's immediate predecessor was Liz Truss, who resigned on her 50th day in office, but not before causing an economic meltdown thanks to her half-baked budget. This ruined the Conservative Party's reputation for fiscal prudence. Before Truss, there was Boris Johnson, who arguably did more damage to Tory credibility. He hosted parties at 10 Downing Street during COVID while people were forced to stay away from their dying relatives. The scandal was dubbed Partygate and it led to Boris's ouster. The Conservative Party's image sank with him. So because of these major scandals, the Tories became extremely unpopular even before Sunak took the helm. Since he's been in office, the Tories have been trailing in opinion polls and their popularity has not increased no matter what he's tried. So it seems he had enough. And he called for an early election. Sunak could have waited till the end of this year, but perhaps he thought it was better to get the sack on a warm day in July. Right now, his focus is not to win, it is to end up in second place, ahead of an unexpected rival. This man, Nigel Farage, he was spotted earlier today enjoying an ice cream at a seaside resort. Farage leads the Reform UK party. It's considered far right. And a lot of traditional Tory voters are switching to Reform. So Sunak will be hoping that he ends the day ahead of Farage. Of course, these are just the party leaders. The result does not depend on just them. There are also the ordinary candidates vying for a chance to become members of parliament. And one thing stands out in this election. It's how diverse the candidates are. The next British Parliament is expected to be the most diverse in history. More than 80 ethnic minority MPs are expected this time around, up from 65 in the last Parliament. Every party is banking on their diverse candidates, even a far-right party like Reform. They may have a different motive for this. But whatever the reason, one thing is quite certain. No matter who wins this election, it will be the most inclusive in British history, with or without a British Indian at the helm. And stay tuned to First Post to get live updates from the election. You can follow the election results in real time on our channel and website. The updates will start at 3 a.m. India time and 9:30 p.m. GMT. Our next story comes from India, where the northeastern state of Assam has been hit by severe floods. More than 1.6 million people have been affected and at least 46 people have died. The state is on high alert. 11 rivers, including the mighty Brahmaputra, are flowing above the danger mark. Assam is one of the most flood-prone states in India. Its fragile ecosystem is crumbling due to the deluge. This includes a World Heritage Site, the Kaziranga National Park, which is home to more than 2,000 majestic one-horned rhinos. Here's our report.
Rivers in spate, entire villages inundated, homes submerged, fishermen marooned. This is the flood-hit Indian state of Assam. It witnessed the first wave of floods in the month of May. After some respite, the second wave of floods began on June 16th. This time, the floods are much stronger than the first wave, leaving a trail of destruction.
बहुत तकलीफ है, गौरव छगले और घर बारी डूब गया और रास्ता में रहता है ब्रिज में। हाँ, बहुत मुश्किल है, अभी तक सुबह से अभी तक खाना नहीं खाया।
पानी से बहुत आदमी लोग को मुश्किल होता है, बहुत आदमी का घर पानी के अंदर गया। अभी तो क्या करेगा, अभी बहुत मुश्किल है।
More than 1.6 million people have been affected. Yesterday, 8 people were killed, the highest since the floods began. This has taken the death toll to 46. Additionally, hundreds of thousands of people have been displaced. Nearly 26,000 people have been shifted to relief camps. Assam is on high alert. Its fragile ecosystem is under threat, including the renowned Kaziranga National Park. This is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, home to nearly 2,200 majestic one-horned rhinoceros. This constitutes 2/3 of their world population. As much of Kaziranga is underwater, the rhinos have been severely affected. But that's not all. The national park is home to about 40 species of animals. More than 1 million animals have been affected by the floods, and at least 17 of them have died. As the floodwaters rise, those who can are now hightailing it to the hills. This migration is a testament to the resilience of these animals. Officials have also been able to rescue at least 72 animals. The Chief Minister of Assam, Himanta Biswa Sarma, has been touring the flood-hit areas. The Chief Minister says his government has enough funds to cope with the situation. He has attributed the devastation to geographical factors, beyond the control of the state. While that may be true, Assam is hit by several rounds of floods every year. The same pattern is repeated annually. There is heavy rainfall, rivers overflow, critical embankments fail, lowlands and riverine areas bear the brunt. Millions are affected, both humans and animals, and many die. The same story plays out repeatedly, and Assam's infrastructure fails its people year after year. The next few days will be critical for the state. As the rains continue, the administration expects the situation to deteriorate on the ground. And while the focus now is to limit the damage and loss of lives, in the long run, Assam needs a much more proactive response against the floods. Sink or swim, the choice is theirs.
Our next story is from Cuba. The Caribbean island nation is in the headlines again. Last year, a report set off alarm bells. The US accused Cuba of hosting a Chinese spy base. Both China and Cuba denied this, of course, so it seems the US went to dig up more proof. Washington has now released its findings. A DC-based think tank has come out with a report, and it does not shine a good light on America's security. This report says that Cuba doesn't just have one spy base, it has 4. And these are spread across the island. 3 bases are near Havana, which is Cuba's capital. The 4th is down south near Guantanamo Bay. That's America's little torture center in Cuba. Now, why does the US think that these are spy bases? Because of the equipment there, which was photographed via satellite. Take a look at these shots from the American think tank. They show a number of antennas and satellite dishes. The US says all 4 bases are SIGINT facilities. That stands for Signals Intelligence. Some antennas have been put up in a circular pattern. The report says they are a circularly disposed antenna array, or CDAA. Now, this configuration and the other antennas can be used to intercept communications. They can gather radio signals, decipher the content, and figure out their source, which means the US could have some of its communication channels compromised. The spy bases may find it tough to get military intelligence that's usually encrypted before it is sent out, but other communication might not be, like scientific research getting transferred or data from civilian rocket launches. A spy base could intercept and decipher this data, which could in turn help China with its own development. The think tank report mentions all of this, and this isn't your usual American paranoia. Arrays like this have been used in the past as well, by both the US and the Soviet Union. They did it during the Cold War. It's not some revolutionary new technology. These seem to be old-fashioned spy outposts. And the Americans may be right in thinking that they are the target. After all, who else would China spy on in that part of the world? And the location of these bases is a dead giveaway. What better location for a spy base than a country opposed to the US? Cuba has been a victim of American heavy-handedness for decades. The US, in fact, embargoed Cuba since 1960. It has tried to change the nation's regime a number of times, with multiple assassination attempts on their former leader Fidel Castro. So why wouldn't Cuba want to get back at the US? Why wouldn't they help Beijing? Especially if China promised to invest in Cuba while building up the spy capabilities. Chinese firms like Huawei and ZTE are setting up communications infrastructure in Cuba, so what's stopping them from setting up something extra? Washington needs to reflect, to think about how it got here, because there's not much else it can do right now. China will keep denying the existence of its spy bases. It did so yesterday as well.
China and Cuba are good friends, comrades, and brothers, and the relationship between the two countries is a model of sincere mutual support for developing countries. The cooperation between China and Cuba is upright and above board. It does not target third parties and will never accept or allow third parties' malicious slander or smear.
She said the China-Cuba relationship is upright and above board. But when it comes to China, upright and above board is very rare, although they keep saying things like that, and there's little that Washington can do about it. But they won't accept it. A US spokesperson recently said, and I'm quoting, "We know that the People's Republic of China is going to keep trying to enhance its presence in Cuba, and the United States is going to keep working to disrupt it." It's an optimistic outlook. Let's see if the US can follow through. For our next story, let me ask you 2 questions. Do you own a luxury handbag? And do you plan to buy one? Well, then, here's some news for you. Recently, Italian prosecutors investigated the factories of Dior and Armani, and this is what they found: unsafe working conditions and illegal workers. But more importantly, they stumbled upon a crucial piece of information. Dior pays its suppliers $57 to make a bag. $57. That's around 5,000 Indian rupees for one bag. That's what it costs Dior, $57. Do you know how much they sell it for? Around $2,800. That's nearly 2.6 lakh Indian rupees, which is 50 times the cost of making. What explains this stupendous price markup? Are you paying for quality handbags, or are you paying for the brand? The revelation has triggered a whole new debate about luxury handbags. Here's a report.
Do you have a Dior bag on your wish list? maybe the book tote or the classic Lady Dior. But here's something you should know before you buy it. Dior pays its suppliers $57 per handbag. How much do they sell them for? A whopping $2,800. That's almost 50 times more. Even if you consider the price of leather, it won't be any better. This was revealed in a sweeping investigation by Italian prosecutors. They looked into Dior's third-party suppliers, and here's what they found. The luxury brand exploited workers. It did not check working conditions of its contracting employees. In one facility, workers were found sleeping inside. Why? So that bags could be produced around the clock. Most of these workers were from China. Some of them were living in Italy illegally. Plus, safety rules were regularly exploited. In these factories, safety devices for gluing the bags were removed so that the workers could operate them faster. But it's not just Dior who's guilty of this, so is Armani. Armani paid its contractors $99 for a bag. And how much did they sell it for? Almost $1,900. Now, both these companies are under scrutiny. They have been placed under judicial administration for a year. But it's not just a Dior or Armani phenomenon. This is happening across the fashion industry. Violating labor laws is a staple for luxury giants. They do it to make more money. People are mistreated, rules are flouted, there are no safety precautions. And those Italian leather handbags that you're so proud of are most probably made in China. So what then justifies the ridiculous cost? Well, there are a few reasons, and none of it is linked to superior quality. One is the brand reputation. The bigger the name, the more the number of zeros on the price tag. Think Dior, Hermes and Chanel. Then comes scarcity, and it's a great marketing tactic. The lesser goods you produce, the higher the price. You create a situation where these bags are not easily accessible, so consumers will do anything to buy them. So you're not just paying for the bag, but for the brand name and the status that comes with it. It all comes down to human psychology. A luxury good is a non-essential product. Consumers can live without them. But the satisfaction of owning a luxury good is a motivator. Luxury goods are often attached to a sense of accomplishment, a feeling that you have made it in life, and that's why people scramble to get a hold of them. But consumers err in thinking that a higher price means better quality. That's almost never the case. It's no secret that luxury handbags are overpriced. Almost a 5-time markup is common. This is used to cover the operational costs. But inflating the price by 50 times is daylight robbery. Luxury brands are preying on people's sense of insecurity and need for social validation. You may be thinking you're paying for premium leather and craftsmanship, but actually, you're paying for the glitzy marketing campaigns and the fancy stores.
For our last story tonight, let me take you back to the 1920s, or what the Americans like to call the Roaring Twenties. This was a period of social and economic change in the country. Also, a period of little to no alcohol. Between 1920 and 1933, selling alcohol was prohibited in the US. So Americans made their way to bordering Mexico. And the city of Tijuana quickly became a favorite. Americans visited it in droves, especially on this day, the 4th of July, which is the US Independence Day. Our story begins on July 4th, 1924, at a Tijuana restaurant. It was owned by an Italian immigrant called Cesar Cardini. The restaurant was brimming with customers. Cardini was low on ingredients, so he tossed together what he had on hand: lettuce, raw egg yolk, olive oil, parmesan, lime juice. And there you had it. In a moment of desperation, the Caesar salad was born. Today, it has turned 100 years old, the salad. And why are we telling you this? Because this century-long culinary saga is an underdog story. Despite the humble roots, the world still hails the Caesar salad. It has become the pride of Tijuana. It has fascinated nations and generations across the world. There are reinventions of the salad from Sweden to Japan. There are books, there are TV shows, memes and TikTok trends. Not many recipes survive a century, and there are very few that enjoy a renaissance. Sure, not everyone is happy about this. Did you know that the dish was originally designed to be picked up and eaten, kind of like finger food? But today the salad usually comes with chopped leaves. Maybe chefs think any salad can be Caesar salad if they stab stab it enough. But according to salad purists, chopping the leaves is only the first crime. This dish has gone from being a sidekick to a superstar, and this journey has seen several wacky twists. The salad is being dressed with yogurt, tequila, kimchi, rice crackers, and even pig ears. And we don't mean to turn this into a ballad of salad. But that's the thing about this dish. There is no right recipe. You could say it applies to all kinds of salads. The only thing certain is that it needs salt, because the name salad comes from the Latin word sal, which means salt. Oil, vinegar, and pepper are some other condiments. But when it comes to the main ingredients, there are no rules really. According to food historians, the earliest salads were wild greens. Ancient Babylonians, Egyptians, Greeks, and Romans all consumed mixed greens, usually with a combination of salt and vinegar. As time passed, the salad saw additions like pasta, bread, and olive oil in France and Italy, fruits and pepper in India and Nepal. We've come a long way since then. Thanks to the internet and wellness trends, salads are now a health fad. According to experts, the global packaged salad market, the market size is worth more than $12 billion. And this should be good news. Salads are the default healthy living food, the poster child of a rainbow diet. But this is slightly concerning as well, this trend, because not all salads are healthy. I'll give you an example. According to a survey, an average American eats 4 salads a week, but the salads are tossed with lots of dressing. Ranch, blue cheese, and Thousand Island are some of the most famous salad dressings. They taste great, but they're also high in calories. And this is not just an American problem. The global salad dressing market is estimated to be worth $80 billion. That's $80 billion. Salad dressings. That's a whole lot of sauce and calories. And we're not purists ourselves, but if there's one thing we can learn from the Caesar salad today, it is this: bland does not have to mean boring. And sometimes salad is at its best when it's simple, which is probably why French fries is not a potato salad.
Say hi, Rohit.
As played on your screens, ladies and gentlemen, are the exclusive visuals. Only CNN News 18 has managed to collect straight from the sources. These are our players, our men in blue, our champions. Not just our champions, ladies and gentlemen, but the world champions, of course, coming back to their soil with the Victory Cup. Of course, the ICC World Cup in their hand. On your screens, you are looking at the players walking out of the Delhi airport, the national capital. They have already successfully reached their hotel, and they will be resting for a couple of hours before they finally go on to meet the Prime Minister for a photo opportunity and a brief, details with the Prime Minister Modi to be emerging after a couple of hours, of course. With those visuals, we are slipping across for a very short commercial break. Do stay tuned. We'll bring you all the developments with regards to the arrival of world champions and, of course, the details emerging from the further team. The champions at the Hotel ITC Mora, where they'll be resting for a couple of hours before they're heading towards the official residence of Prime Minister to meet him and get a photo opportunity. Earlier, we knew that Prime Minister had already congratulated the team via a video message as well and over a phone call. Today, they'll be finally meeting the Prime Minister to have a breakfast with him.
And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. Japan deploys a humanoid robot for railway maintenance. Water levels rise in China's biggest freshwater lake, partially submerging a pagoda. And who will win in the Euro quarter-final between favourites Spain and Germany? Walter the orangutan predicts a German defeat. And finally, we are taking you back in history on this day in 1776. The US gained independence from Britain, and it began when the Continental Congress voted to declare independence. 2 days later, the Declaration of Independence was adopted. Finally, 13 American colonies severed any connections to Britain. We're leaving you on that note. Thank you for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.
Across continents, one powerful news source.
Bringing you diverse perspectives on the issues that matter.
We go beyond the boundaries to give you that little extra about every sporting moment.
So thank you for making First Post 5 million strong. We're counting on your support, and you can trust us to bring you the news unfiltered and unvarnished.
A photo opportunity. Sports journalist Vimal Kumar continues to stay with us on the broadcast. Vimal, there were a couple of hiccups that we got in the second innings, of course, in Barbados when the match was happening. When we finally saw the scorecard at 30 runs from 30 balls, we all sort of lost our hope. A lot of televisions were shut at that point of time. But suddenly the moment and the tables were turned in the second innings when finally our bowling order was switched a bit. What were the thoughts that you had in your mind with regards to the table which got turned in the second innings? What was the mood there amongst the journalists?
Obviously, to be very honest, we thought that this was another lost opportunity.
Millions of British voters will begin casting their vote from 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. local time Thursday. The elections, which are normally held in September and October, have been called early by the outgoing Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. Sunak was hoping to surprise his main challenger, Labour leader Keir Starmer, after a sudden drop in inflation, lower net immigration into the UK, and a controversial Rwanda deportation bill. His Conservative Party, or the Tories, wanted to leverage these positives into electoral chances. But polls suggest that Sunak's party is set to lose big in this election. It could be the biggest election loss for the Conservatives in the history of post-war elections in Britain. Around 46 million voters are eligible to elect 650 members of parliament to the House of Commons, the lower house. Political parties need to win at least 326 in order to form a majority government. The voting age in the UK